Hi guys, this is JJ from Analog Mastering. Today my third video about using the SSL Sigma. Today we're going to talk about Cubase. We're going to talk about using the SSL Sigma together with the Avid Artist Mix. And I'm going to show you some of my workflow, my connections, and how I get things done in Cubase. So first things first, I think we start with the connections, how everything is set up. So I press F4, which opens my audio connections window. When I look at the inputs in Cubase, I only have a microphone defined, which is connected to MIDI input 12. When I go towards the outputs, what you see here are basically 16 Sigma outputs being defined and a dummy output being defined. The first 12 of those Sigma outputs, of the Cubase outputs, I have to say, are going into the SSL alpha link via MIDI, and the last 4 channels, 13 to 16, are going towards my SPL. From those units, they're going into the Sigma inputs. So basically my 16 Cubase outputs correspond with the 16 Sigma inputs. I also have a dummy out, and in my case it's connected towards an internal port, so I can reroute that on my MIDI FX if I want, but I normally don't use these ports. This is because Cubase always works via a main mix, and it's not really, let's say, being set up to support external summing as a default. But I'm going to show you how we do it, so that's fine. Going back towards the top menu, Group FX with me is empty because I use my outputs basically as groups, so no need for group channels in between. External FX, I don't have external FX defined here because all my external gear is hardwired directly on my patch bay in the analog domain. 2 advantages: 1, you don't have delay compensation. 2, you have no additional AD and DA conversions. So this is how I work. I rather send it towards the right bus and leave the hardware hardwired, rather than using the hardware as a plugin and drag and drop it on where it needs to fit in the project. So the project caters for the hardware, not the other way around. It's smarter, it's less plugging and playing, it's less conversions. Going towards external instruments, I've still got some outboard synths connected to my DAW. So I've got an Abstract, I've got a Roland Integra Analog 4, a TR09, an Analog Rhythm. All of these units are connected via the analog outputs, so none of them via USB audio. All analog outputs into my converters, which then flow via MIDI into Cubase. Most important one is the control room. What you see in the control room basically is how I monitor my Sigma. So we've just seen I've got 16 outputs. Those 16 outputs come onto the 16 Sigma channels. Within the Sigma, of course, those channels go through the A and the B or both buses, and then go through the main out. The main out basically is my Burl ADC, which comes back into Cubase via the AES inputs of my MIDI FX. And I use the AES outputs of my MIDI FX to go towards my Burl DAC, which is my monitoring DAC. And the analog output of the monitoring DAC of the Burl is going into the external in of the Sigma. Yeah, the external in of the Sigma. So I can monitor what I print via the external input of my Sigma. So if you look on my Sigma, you see external in is selected, because that's the way that I monitor. I never monitor through the mix bus, always through the external in. So this is my Cubase connections wise. So let's close this for a moment. Then I will show you what this means for the mixer. So when I go into the mixer, what you see here are my instrument channels and some plugins on those channels. And you see those channels are being mapped towards different Sigma outputs. So for each channel I select one of the 16 Sigma buses and put the synth there. You see a lot of ports where you see Sigma 12 selected as a bus. That's because that's my drum bus, and on Sigma 12 I have got my stem audio SA4000 selected. So that's an SSL bus compressor clone, and it basically manages my drum sound. So that's an analog drum bus. Again, not via external FX as an insert, but directly hardwired onto the signal onto the port 12 signal path. Works perfect. Going down towards the mixer, all those red sliders are Cubase output sliders. So what you see there, basically the 16 Cubase outputs, i.e. the 16 Sigma channels. I've got another one for my Sync Gen 2. Sync Gen 2 is a device that generates MIDI clock for my outboard. It's not relevant for the Sigma setup, it's just something that's convenient for me in order to trigger some of my MIDI clocks towards my external gear and have it in sync. On the right hand side of Cubase mixer you have the control room. In the control room on the top what you can choose are plugins for your external input and plugins for monitoring. On the external input I have the waves L1. I use the L1 because I can then print directly towards a stereo mix in either 24 or 16 or whatever bitrate I want, and I can limit it immediately. Why? Because I've got all my outboard already on the mix, and for my own productions I don't need a lot of work after this mix. So once I'm going to print the mix and the mix is pretty much done, there is no such thing as a mastering stage for it for my own productions. When I do stem mastering, I also do that in Cubase, and again there after printing it here, not much is going to happen after that in Wavelab. So I use Wavelab basically for stereo mastering, but I don't have 2 cycles when I stem master or when I mix. Whatever comes out of Cubase and comes back through the external input is what I print, and that's pretty much it. So in order to make sure that that works properly, I purchased the Doro meters from Waves. Why? Because Cubase has a flaw that the mix, let me just see if I can get it on my screen, that the meters only work on the main mix. The meters don't work on the external in. I've requested that feature request a lot of times, but it's still not implemented. So in the control room you can only monitor if you have selected your mix, but in my case I have no signal on my mix because I send nothing towards my mix bus. Everything goes towards the external outs, so I need to be on external to hear any signal. How do I do that? I've mapped a shortcut on my artist transport. So I select key combination on my artist transport, and you see I've switched from mix towards external in. If I now play something on my keyboard, what you're seeing here is there is a signal which is being sent towards bus 4. It goes towards the mixed buses, it comes back into the external in because that's where I can see the Doro getting the signal in, and you can see the L1 picking up the signal as well. So let me just see, and sorry I have my phone in my one hand and my mouse in the other, so this is not as easy as you would think. So this synth is being here, which is the what is it, the emotional lead. You see pressed here, and it goes through my signal path and comes back into my external in. Okay, I'm going to close this mixer for a minute. What you see now is my project window, or my arrangement window, how you want to call it. And I'm gonna play this arrangement from the start, and I'm gonna show you a couple of things what happens. So going back towards this, and this might not be the best way to do it, but as I told you, I didn't find the time yet to find out the workflow doing this with a decent camera and capturing the signal in DAW and doing all the work. So excuse the sound quality, but that's what it is. Okay, going back into the mixer now. What you see is here some drum channels going into bus 12, and I said bus 12 was the SSL, and what you see there is the drum bus being processed. Now, there was a question on how you're going to use the Sigma Delta plugins then within Cubase, and that's what I'm going to show you now. So looking at the AVIDs, you see my instrument channels, and going far enough you see the Sigma buses appear. So I'm going to press bank, and I have Sigma channel 2, I'm going to press 1 notch, and I've got Sigma channel 1 in on my first AVID channel here. I'm just going to press stop for a moment. So I got my, so I have banked and nudged my AVID in order to show my 16 output channels, Sigma channel 1 on 1. And what you see here is that on Sigma bus 1 I have got one insert, which is the Sigma Delta plugin. Of course I could click here and open it, but we want to use the artists, so I'm going to show you how to do that. On the artist you press insert, and with the inserts, you have the inserts in Cubase. You see that the plugin here is selected as the first plugin. I click the top knob, it's loaded, and voila, the Sigma Delta is on my screen. These 16 faders here are the real gains of the Sigma unit itself. So the red faders in the mixer are just the digital outputs in Cubase. We leave them on Unity because you want to mix in the analog domain. So if I now going to use the faders here, I'm actually changing the signal on the Sigma itself. I'm going to show that in a minute. One annoyance is that by default these faders are mapped towards the top knobs. So if I turn the top knob, you will see the fader change. That's not what we want. So if we press shift flip, we can now use the fader to do these channels. So I'm going to press play again. We have the drum bus. Okay, voila, drum bus, drums are gone. Channel 12, fader is down. It's not a digital fade, it's an analog fade. And it's back again. Okay. First step. Now we have, of course, mutes on the AVIDs. We can mute in two ways. What a luxury. We can either mute on the main outs of Cubase, so for example, or solo. So for example, I press play again. I press solo. I have the drum bus soloed via Cubase, which is fine. But if I want to solo via the Sigma, I can do that as well. So I'm just gonna unsolo. I'm gonna press the knob above here, and now I'm soloed on the Sigma. Cubase is still playing, Sigma soloed. within DAW, guys. So remember, this is a plugin. This is not the remote control. This is a plugin within DAW. It's working. You can also mute by pressing the select, and voila, it's gone. So how cool is that? Now there are some more functions within the Control 16 plugin that are not mapped by default into the artist mix. So what I've done is I've mapped some of those functions towards second pages. What you see now is I've got two yellow knobs here lighted. That means that this plugin has additional pages. And I'm going to show you what I did. I need, because the artist banks in 8 and I've got 16 channels, I need to press the pages twice to move 16 channels. So I'm going to press 1, 2. I'm now on my second page of my Sigma, and I've labeled that Mix AB. What you see here is if I press the top yellow button, I can either engage Mix A or Mix B, right? When I press the button, Mix A. When I press the button below, I can engage Mix B. So the cell button on the artist for me now is Mix A. The on button on the artist for me now is Mix B. Cool. The third page, I'm going to press twice again, is really about engaging mono or stereo. So if I select on, mono is on. Once mono is on, oh, I need to flip the switch. Once mono is on, I can use the knob to pan. Great. So everything in this plugin can now be controlled directly from my Avid artists without needing to go towards the external plugin. The good thing is that everything is saved as well. So not only does the 16 plugin take care of managing the channels, but it's also saved with the project. One more tip, I have put the plugin here on channel 1, because if you then bank towards output 1, everything is nicely aligned, and you can use the Cubase descriptions to make sure that you're working the right channel. It's just an easy thing. Okay, so far so good. Going back into the control room, we have talked about the inserts. So I had the L1 in order to limit my external input, the Doro in order to monitor what happens after limiting. I've got the view in there as well when I just do normal mixing sessions to make sure that my levels are in check. But I also have the monitor section. In the monitor section, I have got the Delta Control Bus plugin. So here I can drive the volume of the A bus, the volume of the B bus, engage or disengage the inserts for any of them, and map B to A. Again, these settings are remembered within Cubase. So once you start Cubase, they will come back the same way as they were. I've also inserted the volume plugin here. What you see in the volume plugin, external in is engaged. My startup volume where I want to start the project, again saved with the session. And I've also got my SonarWorks reference into the monitor path, so that's not printed within my mix, but I have room correction for when mixing in my projects. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. So you can use the 16 channel plugin in order to map your artist mix towards those plugin functions. Oh yeah, sorry, I need to show you guys that. So when you go into the plugin, at least in Cubase, and you open the plugin, in Cubase you have a little arrow here on the right hand side. With that arrow you can go towards the remote control editor, and in the remote control editor you can choose for a standard layout, or you can add layouts depending on the device that you have. And one of the ones that you can add is the Avid Series S3. Once the Avid Series S3 is being added, you see here 8 knobs per page and the function per knob. So when I press info, you see everything I've mapped towards the first knobs, everything I've mapped towards the second rows of 16 knobs, and everything I've mapped towards the third rows of 16 knobs. And on the 5th row I have an overall bypass just because I can. So I assume that Pro Tools has a similar remote control editor in order to map how your Avids are being used when using plugins. This custom mapping for me makes things very easy, because I can now do everything in Cubase. I don't need to go outside Cubase. I don't need to flip, use the remote control editor. Everything is saved with the project. Everything stays in one place. The only thing, and again SSL, if you are listening, what I would like is the ability to change the channel names from the plugin as well. So on the remote control editor I can just double click and change it there. It would be great if in the future update you can just click within the plugin and change the name there. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, you know I'm on Gearslots. Just ask, and I always like to help. Thanks guys, until next time.